And Paul, perhaps we can start just thinking back to when you were training as a designer in college and perhaps in your early years.
Yeah.
What were the sort of values and ideas that were kind of either drummed into you, or the sort of things that were floating around that influenced you?
Well, I guess I graduated from university in 1996, so at that period I think people were heavily concentrated on, of course, ecology was a big, I'd say a big interest in society about sustainability. And so, of course, we had to understand also the impact, the social impact, as well as the ecological impact what we were creating might cause. Of course, and not just in a negative sense, but often in a positive sense. So social impact, you know, if a product is very successful, it can add value to people's lives. If a service or an experience is successful and relevant, it can generate jobs and let's say economic prosperity. So values in very different ways. Of course, and I think values which would go beyond the product itself, and that's what I think is very important. Often, probably creatives, they're focusing on that particular building, if it's an architect, an interior designer, or a product designer, a product, but sometimes it's good obviously to look at the wider context, how that affects people.
How you can see through, in a full design sense, I don't think anyone has done this yet, the business of the recycling and the reuse, the processing of all this water that's falling onto us.
Yeah.
I know that by things like digital temperature control, you can reduce the amount of water being used because people get it exactly the right temperature that they like every day without having to run it for 2 minutes first.
Yeah.
Are there examples where you can kind of push that and look at, if you like, the whole kind of plumbing and drainage infrastructure of buildings?
Yeah, I mean, for us, of course, I mean, we're working on lots of stuff. We're working on some projects 3 to 5 years ahead, and we also do, as well as, you know, Grohe is very famous for all the stuff in front, let's say, of the wall, you know, of course, with showers and faucets, etc. But we actually do a lot of the stuff behind the wall as well, our rapid SL systems and I would say integrated toilet systems and everything. So we're looking heavily at what's going on behind the wall also. There's one stage, of course, which is the prevention, like you said. So it's trying to do more with less, so having showers that distribute the water evenly, that reduce consumption, thermostatic controls, etc. And then the other stage, which is very interesting, that we've been working on some time now, is, you know, what do you do with the water afterwards? The thing is, like in most, I would say in most industries, in most companies, we kind of have to go at the rate also what the consumer is comfortable with. And in our research, the consumers still struggle with taking the water, let's say, that's cleansed their body, and then using it for another use. Using it for the toilet, that's no problem. But you still have to flush, of course, for health and hygiene reasons. You can only store that used water in a certain area for so long. And then if you start to filter that water and do different things, you have to also work out, of course, the impact that might have. But it's something we're interested in. We've been working on these kind of things for a long time, and you know, when they're commercially viable and relevant, consumers are really, let's say, ready for that kind of stuff. I think you'll see more and more of these things coming onto the market.
Because it's a curiosity that you get these parallel values. They're not contradictory, but let's say the value of cleanliness on the one hand, where you just never want to see dirty water ever again. On the other hand, you've got the value of recycling, the value of sustainability, which has become increasingly strong. And in a way, the designers who can synthesize those things somehow were doing a great job.
I think that's it, and that's the challenge, isn't it? It's constantly edging towards, let's say, doing things better. I think, in some ways, those things can be in very unexpected ways. So, an example was something we did a few years ago. We identified a simple insight that most showers that everybody was creating on the market had let's say, an angled head, about 42 degrees or so. So in our new range of rain showers, we actually changed the angle of the head to 7 degrees. And that meant I could reduce the packaging, that simple insight, by 50%. Now, we sell the products in 130 countries around the world. So it meant I could fit twice as many onto pallets, onto trucks, onto airplanes and ships. significantly reduce the carbon footprint and significantly reduce also the costs, which don't really add any value to the consumer experience. So those simple insights also, they're very ecological, they make good sense, and they come from creative thinking. They come from not just focusing on creating or designing a product, they come from looking at the wider, I guess, the wider context, and in this case, how it's actually distributed and shipped. And that's before you start talking about the products themselves and how you reduce consumption. And I'm often looking at this. I read a very interesting book a few years ago called Nudge, and it was talking about nudging consumers to do the right thing, not dictating, not putting restrictions in, but describing through, let's say, the experience, how they can reduce consumption in a really intuitive way. And I think that's a really interesting concept that we've been building into some of our hand showers as well, by putting eco buttons in certain places. So you can have a big spray if you're rinsing, and then if you're enjoying the water, turn the water down. So some of those areas are quite interesting.
Of course, there's a very big parallel in the architectural world, where it's simply not true that you can't design, let's say, a great stadium if you've never designed one before. I mean, everybody has to start somewhere. Because that then leads on to this question of users. Architects and interior designers quite frequently are designing for people either immediately or certainly in the future that they don't know, they've never met. They do not have any sort of contractual or in fact any other relationship with them other than those people are enjoying or not the environments they've created. Now in your case there's a similarity. You're making millions of products that are being used around, designing and making millions of products being used around the world all the time, and yet your consumers, you cannot have a relationship with them. There are too many of them. How do you get into the minds of what consumers and specifiers are thinking? Do you do it through research, or is it research plus intuition? How does the studio take this on?
I guess it's both. So it's definitely research and it's definitely intuition, because the intuition part comes from the synthesis or let's say the filtering of that research. So it's both. Lots of research. For me as a designer, I can't stress this enough to other designers that it's really important, it's imperative that you gather as much information as possible. And then it's really important to be objective, because I think what many people do is they interject their personality or their views into something, and you have to understand who you're designing for, the context that they might use the product, the experience you're trying to create, and if you can be objective as an individual designer based on all that information, based on research, whether it's physiological research or whether it's long-term societal trend research, or whether it's comparative analysis, or ethnographic research. All of those things give you, I would say, a good pot of information, which then you can take back and pull out the bits which are relevant. And if you do that in an objective way, I think, and focus on who you're trying to create the experience for, then I think you don't have to meet every single, like you say, it's not possible, consumer, but I think you can make a relevant judgment. And then if that's developed through your brand values, your filters, consumers already have a respect, especially, I would say, consumers who've used your brand before. They have an understanding of what you stand for, and obviously if you can pick on some insights and deliver things that answer their problems, they already buy into your brand and the values, so it will be relevant.
Do you find, for example, that the public responds differently to, let's say, a new range of things you've designed as opposed to the design community, or do you find that actually they tend to pretty much run together?
I mean, it's really difficult to answer, I guess, because sometimes it does run together, often it doesn't, to be honest. So I guess, I mean, often when you're dealing with consumers, let's say, their behavior is set, let's say, and changes, I would say, more readily. But when we're dealing with interfacing with other creatives, architects, interior designers, we are part of the products we produce, are part of an overall experience they're trying to create. So if you think a bathroom is made up of many, many components, flooring, lighting, heating, lots of different materials coming together. And I guess their challenge, of course, would be to bring all of those things together and make sense and create an experience from all of those things coming together. And I guess people like myself and companies like ours, we have to work very closely with them I think, to understand that process. And then I think it's a lot easier to work together. Then I think there's a respect, there's an understanding. I mean, I learned so much. I mean, I've been coming to the WAF now since it started, and every single year I come away with information, and we have interesting dialogue. I come away with insights which definitely affect directly the products that we will design in the next 2 years. It's a very rich source of information for me, my team.
Paul Flowers and Grohe, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.